I'm Michael Urbina. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Latter-day Saint Arts. On behalf of the Center, thanks so much for joining us today. We are so happy to have you here with us. A few housekeeping things before we get started. First, feel free to say hello by dropping your name and your artistic discipline and your city or hometown in the chat. Our timeline for today, our guest speakers will speak for about 25 minutes. And then we will open it up to questions and answers. At that point, we'll invite you to drop your questions in the chat, and Glenn Nelson will step in to feed some of those questions to our panelists for today. I am so pleased to introduce our guest speakers, Steve Peck and Jackie Leishman. Steve is a one-of-a-kind triple threat. He is an evolutionary biologist, a poet, and a novelist. He's a biology professor at Brigham Young University and a critically acclaimed award-winning writer. He's also a member of the Center's advisory board. Jackie is a photographer turned pioneering collage artist. She is known for using both traditional and non-traditional materials to explore the push and pull between opposing ideas. And you might sense a theme emerging here, which is the focus of today's session, which is successful cross-disciplinary collaborations. And there's no one better to talk about this subject than Steve and Jackie. I'm sure they'll talk more about this, but this power duo worked together on a project for more than 4 years, where they combined Jackie's visual work with Steve's found poetry, constructed using words and phrases from peer-reviewed scientific literature on climate change. Their investigation into the losses caused by climate change received critical acclaim and was published in the Cold Mountain Review, Whitefish Review, Penumbra, and Flyway Journal of Writing and Environment. And I won't spoil what they're up to next, but we're excited to have them here to share their insights and tips and best practices for successful collaborations with experts in all fields. So Steve and Jackie, take it away.
Well, thank you so much for having us. This is a lot of fun. Steve, unmute yourself.
I just gave the most beautiful diatribe in my life, but I was muted, so I can't reproduce it. It's gone. So no, thank you, Michael. I'm so excited to be here. I love what the center's doing. It's doing such important things, and so thank you.
Yeah, we thought that we want to just kind of dive right in, and we know we wanted to kind of show you how did we come about? Like, how did we start this whole thing? And actually, Steve pointed out on our conversation the other day, we've actually been doing this for over 6 years. So, but we'll kind of go back and forth and kind of try to show you what it is like in our conversations and how we build off each other. We have a slideshow to kind of give you a sense of kind of visually what we're doing. But we just wanted to start with kind of setting the scene for you. So Steve, talk about how we met. How did this begin?
Great. Yeah, I remember it quite well. You were coming to Written Vision to do a show, and Brad Kramer contacted me and said, hey, do you want to be on a panel? He knew my interest in art and literature and all things aesthetic. And I said, well, let me look at it and see if I feel comfortable on the panel. And so I got into your work. I went to your website, and I thought, this is fantastic. And so I agreed. And so Jackie came, presented a Written Vision, and we started talking. And our conversation now has gone on 6 years from that point. And it's evolutionary biology. I can say that this evolved over a long time through many conversations, and the collaboration began mostly with talking about art and nature and current events and things that were going on. And from there, we decided, and I don't remember it as a decision, actually. I just remember it as a kind of emerging out of the conversations that we could collaborate and create something really quite unusual and wonderful. So that's where it began. It began with the project we call Decreation, because some of our conversations were about climate change and things that we were seeing on the ground with that. And from there, it began to emerge something quite, I think, remarkable, began to occur as we began to try to create together something meaningful and something exciting that I think that we could make in the world. So that's kind of how it began.
Yeah, I mean, it began. So Steve came to my show. The show is about, actually, it was called the Creation Series, and it was about taking, the 7 periods of creation and actually looking at it scientifically about how is light created or how is matter created. And so Steve was really interested in that. And what I was interested in about Steve is that he brought a perspective to my work that I had never really thought about. And so then that conversation was so enriching, and we were like, well, we're not done having this conversation. Let's keep going. And how we decided to make work was, we thought, why not? I think there was like this sense of openness to just seeing, well, what new would come if we decided to do something physical that's based on these very rich conversations. Because we both like to make things. And that was really interesting in the sense that we still made our own things, in the sense like Steve doesn't help me make my art, and I'm not writing his poems with him, but there is a back and forth that's going on where I was like, oh, after that conversation, I made this. What do you think of that? And then he would write a poem in response to what I had made. And then that poem would inspire the next piece of art. And so it was this kind of back and forth that was going on where like the conversation was the centerpiece. And then we would make things in our own time and start sending them back and forth to each other. Steve, do you want to say anything? Like, am I leaving anything out about that?
No, that's a great description of how we worked. And sometimes we'd exchange the same poem and the same art back and forth and respond to it artistically.
Mhm.
And I would respond to it poetically. And we were sort of dancing through 3 disciplines: science, poetry, and art. And it became a really rich conversation in that sense. So it's just as you described, though. It began with conversation, then turned into attempts to find that in our disciplines and our art. And it turned out to be really quite, I don't know, I want to say productive, but that's the wrong word, because productions has kind of a connotation of business or purpose or teleology. And we were really interested in the aesthetics that were being produced. And I think I need a better word. I'll find one someday. But yeah, it was, and this back and forth between conversation and work continued to flourish, I think, and been very, very helpful in both of our arts. So, yeah.
Yeah. One of the things we wanted to talk about, we want to share a slideshow so you can kind of see what we're doing, but just this idea of like, how do you even pick a good collaborator, right? Like this idea of like, how do you even know if that will be a good fit? And what kind of person do you need to be a good collaborator as well? And one of the things was that you actually have to really respect the other person's work. You feel like you're really interested in that. You think that you're in awe of that, right? I think there has to be this idea of kind of mutual admiration for what the person is going to offer to this partnership. And I think the other thing that I've found in collaboration is that I have to subsume my own work for the collaboration. I have my own work. That's very important to me. This isn't all that I do. And so when I collaborate, I realize that it's going to be slightly different, and I can be flexible, and I can be really open to going in new directions. And I feel like, Steve might bring something up. That's a great idea. And I'll be like, oh, I'll think about that, or he'll be like, I don't quite understand that part. And, I'll be like, well, actually, I don't either. Maybe I need to change it. These ideas of kind of being of service to what's happening in between, to to that kind of give and take is really important, because if you go in thinking, I own this, or I'm doing what I'm going to do, then maybe collaboration isn't a great fit for that. Steve, what do you think?
I agree completely. And in fact, one of the attributes that both Jackie and I share is a sense of honest critique. And Jackie's several times said to me, this poem doesn't work. And that's important to me. I mean, that's part of the process is both offering things and then responding to what's offered back, even if it might not be, you know, I think, oh, this is the greatest poem ever. And Jackie will say, maybe. And that kind of back and forth where we can appreciate each other's work, that we can talk about it honestly and openly, has been a really important part of the criticism. And in terms of all aspects of it, everything from a particular piece of work that we're working on to when we're having a conversation about where things can develop, what new concepts can we bring into, what new things are going on in the world and in science and in poetry and art that needs elaboration and or that we can incorporate. And as Jackie said, we both have our own projects, and those kinds of things shouldn't get lost in the collaboration. It's not that everything we do has to be for the collaboration, but the collaboration has been a very rich and flourishing experience. And so it's been an opportunity where I think my work has been enriched and my poetry has been enriched. And I think the success of it has been a mark that this has been a really productive collaboration.
Yeah. Let me just point out, Steve, that like, I don't just tell you your poems don't work. I am no poet. So like, I'll just say, I don't understand this part, or I'll read it out loud to you. And I'll say like, I get stuck here.
Yeah.
And because a lot of times when we're talking, he'll send me something. I'll be like, well, I don't quite understand poetry. I'm not an expert in it, but I do love to read poetry, but I don't understand this word, or like, how does this work? Like it
Yeah.
makes me sound, I just want to point out that like, I'm not like concerning myself as a poetry expert, but so I want to share a screen. I want to show you what, like, yeah, we want to show you what we're doing. Let's see, here we go. And we can, and if there's anything that we go through, jot down a note and save it for the Q&A, because we're just going to go through this really kind of as an overview, and then we can go back deeper into anything that you may want more information about. So we started, like Steve said, we started with decreation. This was our first body of work, but this is how we submit work for journals and different things, where the title of the piece is from the scientific journal, right, Steve?
Uh-huh.
And
yeah,
the
paper
poem's made. Yeah. Okay, go ahead. Talk about that.
Yeah, exactly. What I did is I took the climate change scientific literature and I worked on finding poetry, and not like block out poetry. What I would do is I would use the words in the scientific article to create the poem, but I was really committed to both the paper itself, trying to pull from it something poetic in a very dry scientific article. But what was interesting to me was the way that I found the poetry so easily. There was so much meaning and so many visual references and so many things that just lended itself to this project. And I'd never seen this done before, but it really worked. So the title of the poem was taken from the actual scientific article, and you can see there that this was from an article called "An Arctic Predator System in Flux: Climate Change Impacts on Coastal Space Used by Polar Bears and Ring Seals." And then the reference to the papers on the bottom of the picture. And this is how they appeared in the journals as well, the literary and artistic journals.
So like, here's another one from that. And then here's all the pieces that I made for that, right? So each one of these has a poem that goes with it. And so I would send Steve pictures and he'd be sending me poems, and like this would just be going back and forth. But this kind of gives you that this is how many we made just from that decreation series. And we made a few larger pieces as well. And so I wanted to show this because this is the title of the piece is What the Octopus Knew, which I will show you the poem. But it was about coral reefs. And so this is a very big piece. And then as Steve and I talked, we talked about how difficult it was with the coral bleaching. And so I actually went back over my collage with white paper and destroyed what I had created. So it was this very like physical process of that. And Steve was talking about, he had this poem that went with it, which was, we were talking about this loss of color. And so his poem, which I found so fascinating, was from the perspective of an octopus who camouflages herself, and color is such a part of their life that it's leaving, right? So this octopus is kind of, this aesthetic world is changing for it. And so it was just a fantastic poem that got into the mind of an octopus. Do you want to say anything about that, Steve?
Yeah, so this was work after decreation. So I'm not pulling this from the scientific literature, except in the sense that I've read a lot about octopuses, and so I began to be enamored with the way that they can sit on a coral reef, and they can mimic not only the colors but the textures of the coral. Their bodies take on the shape of the coral, the nuances, the little protuberances that are all over the coral. The octopus takes that, and as the coral reef gets destroyed by climate change, as the ocean becomes more acidic and coral reefs start to bleach, they turn white, they're dying. And I think Jackie's piece really captured this, and it inspired me to think through what an octopus is going through in these kinds of changes where its world is being, in ecology we'd call it depauperate. It's a process of loss of color, of texture, of all kinds of things, and of habitat for the octopus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Here's another one. It's called Destroyers and Monsters, which was kind of about the end of evolution. And it was about what we're doing as humans. And the Q&A, it would be fun to go back through this. I would take bits of this poem and I would write them on a piece of paper as kind of a visual clue of the poem in general. And then I made this diptych kind of in response to that, with Steve's words kind of hanging in my studio. And then this was one about rainforests. So in the whole decreation series, we're looking at climate change in general, right? Coral reefs, rainforests, all different, kinds of things. And this whole collection was bought by the BYU Library, which we're so grateful for, as a way to teach students about interdisciplinary work, which we love. And then this was our next body of work, which was it's called Absence, and it's about the troublesome fires, and that happened in Colorado, but also about the loss of forests in general. And this was the first piece in the troublesome. There's 5 series like this. We'll show you the first and the 5th, but it's about a verdant forest that becomes then just ash and sticks. And Steve, do you want to talk just like quickly about where you're getting your poetry from here?
Yeah, this is where I did some experiments in poetic form and things like this. And one of the things I tried to do in some of these poems is to actually represent the poem like this is thinking about the loss of habitat, the loss of trees, the loss of everything through the fire. And the fire is recognized as a climate change fire, meaning that it was so much hotter and fiercer than you would find naturally in this. And so Jackie starts with this lush, beautiful sort of pieces. They're not representative per se, but they kind of capture the mood of a forest. I think they capture the sense of a forest really deeply. Their beauty, the cool colors, the green. And so in my poetry, I tried to capture that diminishment as time as the ecosystem changed. My poems changed from more lush descriptions to almost depauperate descriptions.
Right. Because it's because it goes to this, right? And which was the end of that forest, which this was actually really hard for us to make. And we have friends that lost a lot in those fires. And this is more of this about these loss of forests, and Steve really playing with poetic structures, which was so fun for me to learn about. But yeah, so this is just a few pieces from that series. And then after we finished that series, we went to what we call in between, which is just an in between time. We don't know what we're going to make yet, but we know we want to make something. So Steve sent me water sounds he'd recorded around the Provo area, and I made these pieces in response to those recordings, and would send him pictures of that. I made this in response to our conversation about the importance of duality and kind of these meeting places. And so I would send him a picture of that. So we're having conversations, or we don't quite know what we're doing, but we're still making, right? Or he's sending me poems, or I'm sending him artwork, right? Here's a poem that's, really beautiful. We were talking a lot about birds. And so I made this piece, and, here's his, beautiful poem to go with it. And here's another one. And these aren't really part of any particular body of work. They're just kind of us playing, right? And enjoying these things, which is also fun to see that, it doesn't always have a purpose, right? Like, it's part of this. It's just like, well, we just like to create and make things and discover things together. And then we really started kind of coming into something. And this is one of the poems that you'll see in this. He's, has a bunch of these are things we're starting to kind of dance around, this idea of emergence, of just like emergence in general. And this idea of our brigadoons. I sent him a part from Annie Dillard's Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, where she talks about brigadoons. And I was like, I'm really interested in this idea. And so this is how I work. These are Steve's poems, right, that are on my studio wall with my notes on them, right? You see on the right a little closer of my notes of from our conversations, or what's the essence of this? What does visually this make me think? Or how does this make me feel? And then the piece next to it is what I'm working on as I'm building, thinking about his poetry. And then these are two of our pieces, with his poems, but this is what we have made so far about this next body of work. I'm going to just stop sharing there, because to be honest, we got tired of being really depressed about climate change. It's really hard to make things and kind of stay in that space, not to say that we don't think it's still important, but we also wanted to kind of dive into ideas about hope and what we can do, and what's worth saving. And also these ideas about faith and spiritual experiences kind of kept popping up in our conversations. So we're interested in that, right? And so that's where we're at now. Steve, what do you want to say about that?
Yeah, and that's been a really interesting part of our collaboration. Is there are these times where we're just exploring and playing. I've been thinking a lot about play in aesthetics, and the space that it takes to explore and try and fail and try to create something begins with sort of a just sketches of ideas. Sometimes we don't even really know where the work's going, but we can sense something, like we're seeing something through a fog, or just over the edge of a horizon that we think we're going towards, and this is how emergence came about. We had a number of conversations about time and instances in our lives where people come into our lives that really turn out to matter and to change who we are and what we are. And those kinds of events, that sense of exploration, have been an important part of the collaboration. It wasn't that we ever set like a bunch of goals, here's our goals for this year. We're going to do A, B, and C and submit to X, Y, and Z. It's always been more about flow and about capturing something happening in our experience and interest that seems to direct us towards certain concepts, certain ideas, and that become ultimately productive.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I would love to go into any of that. I don't know what the group actually has questions about. I know we're kind of at that time. I don't know, Michael, if we have, where are we at? Do you want us to keep having our own conversation, or do you want us to answer anybody's questions, or?
Yeah, let's invite folks to start dropping questions in the chat, and maybe you each can take a couple more minutes to offer just some closing thoughts to your presentation while folks get their questions together, and then we'll switch over to Q&A.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, just to build up on what Steve was saying, in some of these conversations, it's just like, we'll just say, what have you been thinking about lately? And there's things that are coming up in our mind and we're not quite sure what we want to do with them. And it's interesting how similar ideas, like we are kind of coming at things from two different perspectives, right? Or like these ideas about time, or like, how do you move through the world as a spiritual being, or have a spiritual experience, or like, how are you in awe of nature? Like, what does that look like? Where for Steve, it's about, like really observing birds. And for me, it's, often like just hiking and, seeing these kind of big vistas and thinking about like the grandeur of that. And what does that mean? All these things, or, reading, like we both are really big readers, and, we're always recommending books back and forth, or films, right? We were like, some of the things that have really set us off that we talked about for a long time are the movie Tick, Tick, Boom, right? Which was about the playwright who, wrote Rent, and kind of his story, which we were just fascinated by. We were interested in American Symphony, which is about John Batiste, the musician. We were interested in the book The Rise, which is about creativity, mastery, and failure, written by Dr. Sarah Lewis. And I think this kind of ongoing thing that, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're actually really inspired by excellence, right? We're pulling from everything: films, music, quotes, literature, science, current events, and just like people going after something is really inspiring. And we're going after something, like we take it really seriously, both of our own work and the work that we're doing together. And just being really open to allowing, like, whatever's going to influence is going to influence. And what we do with that is actually quite creative. And how that emerges. So I don't know, that was, Steve, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, and I think that's been a really important source of ideas and thought. We would find something that would inspire us. Just recently, Jackie told me to read some sections of Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. And I'd read that a long time ago, but in this new context, I read it again, and I started to think about creation. I started to think about the way that art is made, or ideas come, or creativity. A lot of what we do, we think about creativity a lot. We think it's a force in the universe that needs expression. I mean, we think about God as being a creator, and I've always contended, and I've taught this a lot longer than it's become a more powerful idea to me, is the idea that in some ways our life should be a work of art, that that we are part of creation, but with the responsibility to be creators ourselves, to create more in the world, to be open to where our talents and friendships and the things that in life lean us into thinking about making our lives a work of art as well, and doing it through art even is what we're trying. And Jackie's comment about excellence, I think, is really important. We really do want to make this the best we can possibly make. We're constantly trying new things and new ideas, new thoughts. And the thing we're thinking about lately is the idea of emergence, this idea that the world isn't a reductive, deterministic place. It's actually full of randomness and fullness and things to explore. And as you explore the world in that sense, you open yourself to more encounters with nature and with art and with all of the things that make life, I think, so important.
And also, I mean, just to add to that is also this idea of just being a really curious person, right? Like to have a conversation where like, I don't need to be an expert in a lot of things. And like Steve will bring something up and I'll be like, I don't know about that. You know, talk to me more about that. Right. And just be like, well, I haven't thought about it that way. That's really interesting. And like, just being really curious to like, and I think there's also this idea of, and I feel this from talking to you with you, Steve, and, you know, is just like also a real love of the world, like just really being in love with being alive, like all of it. You know, and it's really heartbreaking. And it's also the most amazing thing. And, you know, to balance those things always, you know, in one body and in the same moment is actually, you know, one of the amazing things about being human. So, like, you know, we're trying to put our finger on that, right? These really kind of elusive ideas, and we're trying to get at that. And I don't know if we ever actually will, but man, like the journey of that, right? The search for that, and to have somebody that's like willing to do that with you, and you walk away feeling more full from that and not drained is a real gift. So, you know, I mean, thank you, Steve, right? For,
Thank you.
you know, to being that, but yeah, that's what I was thinking about that. And, you know, one of the things that has come up lately, especially, you know, as we were talking about this work, you know, like this idea of, you know, I was reading Annie Dillard talk about Brigadoon, and I was like, what is, you know, what is actually that? And we started thinking, you know, Steve and I started having a conversation about that, about like how you can't go through life saying like, I'm going to have a spiritual experience right now, or like, I'm going to make the best piece of art that's ever happened right now. You know, like all you can do is be on this journey of trying to be the kind of person that those experiences can come to, right? Like inspiration happens when you're already walking, right? When you're already making, or, you know, like there's really some really famous artists that are like, you know, people are like, oh, you know, when do you work? You know, when does inspiration strike? And they're like, it strikes every morning at 9 a.m. because I'm already like, I work. And then inspiration comes in that time. And, you know, there's this other quote that I love that I've shared with Steve, which I feel like kind of captures this idea of what we're getting at, which is like Philip Guston was talking about, you know, you go into your studio and you bring the world with you, right? Whether it's your studio, your writing time or whatever, like the world is with you. And then after the first hour, right, like a lot of them leave. And after the second hour, it's like your family, right? Like these kind of close people that fill your mind leave. And then he's like, and after the third hour, if you're lucky, you leave. And just the work remains. And I think that's what we're really trying to get at, is this idea of like purity of like, of what that is. And we're coming at it from all these different ways, but it manifests in all of the arts, right? Dance, right? When you dance, you can feel that, right? When you're in the flow and it happens, or music, or, you know, a poem, or, you know, visual art. Like we all have, you know, theater, you know, anyone who like goes to theater, you're just like, you can feel it when the actors, you're just like, something just beautiful happened there that was not you know, that was a gift that we were given as an audience, and probably they got as actors in that. So I don't know, but if there's questions, we'd love to go with those.
Yeah. No, I think what you said was right on the money, and I think I don't think I appreciated until I started working how true it is that it's actually in the work that inspiration comes. I always pictured, I suppose, back when I was a teenager, that poems were something you just walked through the wilderness and they came upon you as a gift from the muse. But the poems appear as I begin to think, and like in looking at your art for our project, the poems don't really appear to me until I might have some general ideas until I actually start trying to put words on paper. And then it's a very playful process at that point. The poem begins to emerge from the page in light of the things that I'm thinking. And then it may have to be changed, or it may need more work. So that idea of just trying and thinking, and it has some risks. You have to take chances. You have to do all these kinds of things that allow those kinds of inspirations to come to you. And that's when they come for me. They come for me when I'm actually trying to do it on my own, and all of a sudden something more than me. And I don't mean this necessarily in a mystical sense. I mean it in a sense that there is something about creation itself that feeds creation. And I think that has to be a part of the process.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea, Steve. I'm gonna write that down. I think we should talk about that more. But that
This is how we work.
Creation. I think that's I want to dive into that more. I'm just writing that down for myself, but yeah, I don't know. Glenn, are there questions that people
Yeah,
have
we do.
started?
Let me
Okay.
jump in now. This has been so wonderful. I want to mention, though, something that we forgot to say at the beginning. This virtual discussion is one of a series created by the Center for Latter-day Saint Arts' advisory board. So I want to thank the advisory board for helping put this all together. Okay, so today we have about 15 minutes of Q&A. And then at the top of the hour, when we finish, we'll hold the Zoom open for 15 minutes for breakout rooms for you all to meet each other. In the past, when we've done this, it's been a really great way to meet new people in our community. So stick around for that if you can. We've already had a bunch of questions. A couple of them are duplicates, so I think we should start with the duplicates, don't you? One of them, if I could just paraphrase generally, was you're continuing to do your, let's say, normal work, the work that you have done before you started collaborating. But how has your collaboration and that work affected and influenced the work that you're doing on your own?
I can take a stab at that because it influences it for me greatly. Maybe not in the sense of me trying to reproduce exactly what we're doing on my own, but in the sense that all of my art, my writing, my novels and other things come out of my encounters with the world. And in a sense, the collaboration becomes one of those major collaborations, but it's not the only one. And so it begins to kind of create a new me, in a sense, as I think through how the work that we're doing affects other things. It's all over the place. I think I'm kind of a holist, being an ecologist. I kind of see the pieces almost always forming something bigger than the whole, and that's true in me as well. The encounters that I have with Jackie, with others who are inspiring me and thinking, helping me create something new in me that it doesn't exist anywhere else. It's not like I'm going to pull this piece from that work and this piece from that work. It's more that I become something when I become more artistic, more poetic.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't know if I don't think you can draw a line from one to the other and be like, oh yeah, that's influence there, but I'm different. And Steve challenges me and it's a challenging process. And when in my own work, I'm always trying to become better. And so, I'm always changed. Like, it's just like, it's a process, right? Like, I hope I'm becoming a better person. And I hope that through working with Steve, right, I've been challenged, like I've been introduced to new ideas. And that's in me now. And so when I work, I'm now a more expansive person. And I mean, hopefully the work is getting better, right? The work I do on my own, hopefully that's getting better. And hopefully our collaboration is continuing to push at boundaries as well. But I don't think that you can just, I don't know if people would be able to make that connection, except that the thing in common is the person making it, and the person making it is becoming a more expansive artist, creative thinker along the way.
Great.
Yeah.
All right, I have a question for you. I know quite a few of the people who are listening in, and I assume that there will be a bunch of people who will catch up on this later. But I was just wondering, when you're working with interdisciplinary collaborators, sometimes you don't speak the same language. So how have you navigated just the distinctions of vocabulary as you work together? Do you have to do little tutorials like, in my world, this is the language I'm using, or how does it work for you two?
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand all the intricacies of poetry at all. I mean, I'm not, but I do love it. I mean, I read poetry on my own, and all I can do is like, it feels right, right? I'll tell Steve, like, this feels right. I don't understand why, I can't articulate it, but man, it's really working. And I'll try to tell that. And then he'll, like, take that and interpret that for me. And I think it's the same in visual arts. Visual arts has its own language. And Steve will be like, I don't know, I'm just feeling this, and he'll have ideas about it and he'll articulate it in the way that he can. And then we just go back and forth. But I don't think it's like, here's a glossary of terms or this, but it's really this back and forth of understanding. And just, again, it's that curiosity of just like, well, teach me about that. Right? Like,
Yeah.
Tell me more about what that form of poetry means. Like, that's really interesting. Is there some, like, what would be we'll have a conversation. What's the visual equivalent of that? Right? Like, how does that come about? And I'll be like, I need to go think about that, Steve. I need to go mess around with some things and see if I can kind of understand that better through how I work. And I mean, what do you think, Steve?
Yeah, I think in our collaboration, there's a lot of back and forth questions. I've always had the opinion that questions are better than answers. And one thing about our collaboration is I think our value and ability to express questions to each other when we come across things that we don't understand, or there's new terms or anything, we feel pretty free to admit we don't get it and we need some help. And a lot of times what that kind of questioning does is it opens more questions. So that when, for example, if Jackie asked me something about science and I began to expand on it, the holes in my own thinking all of a sudden become really apparent, and new questions pop into my mind that maybe I don't understand this as well as I have, and I'm open to that. There's not a sense that we have separate expertise that we stick to and refer to each other, or I mean defer to each other about things. It's always what do you think? How does this work? Explain this to me. And we both use these kinds of questions to open each other's world, to create new worlds. All of this happens, I think, in our value of attending to questions in our art. And I think those kind of questions actually make the make the art and collaboration better. Being open to questions in any aspect of life, I think, as Jackie said several times, it's this curiosity, it's this willingness to dig in, and that's why we sometimes sometimes we suggest to the other that maybe this entire book needs to be read before we go on, and we'll do that, like Ann Dillard or Kerouac's The Road, or whatever.
Yeah, On the Road. That was so
On the
cool.
Road, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let me ask you another question. Comes from Jason Kerr. I have a sort of meta question, he says. Since so much of your collaboration has involved ecological or biological processes, how has that changed how you think about the ecology of collaboration?
Ooh,
First of all, hey, Jason.
Jason.
Good to see you. That's a great question. The ecology of collaboration.
That's it.
Well, I think to start, I just kind of want to pick up where Steve left off about this idea of questions, because I actually think this has a lot to do with kind of the environment, right, of the collaboration that we're creating. And one of the things that Steve and I have talked about a lot is that we are trying to make art and that we're not making illustration. And art is a place for questions and illustration is a place for answers. We're not illustrating an idea. We're not telling you this is exactly how it is. We are creating a space that is open for interpretation, for exploration, for surprise, even by us, right? Like, we don't know exactly what's going to happen in there. And, you know, even in an environment, right? Like when you go to a pond, like what may emerge there? Who knows? Like, it's just like all of a sudden there's a frog that no one ever knew about. It's like all of a sudden happening there. Like we want to leave that in our work. And I think that that's really important for audiences to understand when they look at art. And we've also talked about how poetry and visual art actually overlap quite a bit in what they're trying to do, and trying to capture a feeling, and this idea of like leaving space, right? Like Steve's poems aren't like telling you exactly what's happening with climate change, right? Like this, then this, then this. It's like this exploration of what's happening in that space and how do we feel about that? We don't know. I mean, we know in some like that we don't like it, but like there's so many feelings that you just kind of have to sift through. And I don't know if a general, and this will be maybe an extreme thing to say, but I don't know if the general population understands the difference between those two things, between art and illustration. One is not better than the other. They both have a place, that's important, but that the expectations of what you would get from those should be different. I don't know, Steve, do you want to, did I answer Jason's question or did I just go off on my own?
No, I think that's exactly right. Because I think that's kind of in ecology, one of the things that all the organisms in an ecology are interested in is finding energy. And I think our energy may be questions. I mean, that may be the driving factor of the ecology of our collaboration. And I think to expand on Jason's question, I really like that in ecology, it is a world of processes, and processes of all kinds. There's, I was just sitting here thinking of metaphors. Yeah, sometimes you need to chew on things like a herbivore, and sometimes you need to go after things like a predator, and sometimes you need to borrow like a parasite. I mean, I started thinking along those lines, but I think more generally, the idea of a collaboration as an ecosystem is that ecosystems are vulnerable to randomness. They need to explore their world in lots of different ways. And so I think I'm going to have to do more thinking about that. But I think there's something richly productive about the idea of looking at it as a collaboration as a ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. I wrote it down. I made a note for us to keep talking about this.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're getting a picture of how the two of you work, but I have a question though that comes also from Rachel Barker, who's terrific as a collaborator. Have you had bad experiences previously with collaborators? I mean, it's not the easiest thing. And I would add, how do you find the right person to collaborate with?
Oh, you mean like in the past with previous collaboration, like if we've collaborated with other people? I collaborated with people for many years. I was part of a collaborative called The Fourth Artist, but it was all visual artists. And how we kind of came to that, sometimes it was actually really difficult. And what makes it difficult is when someone is unwilling to subsume themselves within the collaboration. It's like you're offering yourself, but you also have to give. You have to be flexible and to know that this is not your own thing. If you can't do that, then don't collaborate, and that's fine, right? Yeah, it's not always easy, but when it works, it's really great, and it makes your life a lot richer. But how do you find a good collaborator? Again, like what I said in the beginning, you have to find somebody you really respect their work and them as a person. Right? Like anyone who's talked to Steve for like 2 minutes sees that he's one of the most generous people. Like his brain is absolutely huge, and yet he always makes whoever he's talking to feel like we're on the same level for sure, right? Like, okay, thank you for that generosity. You know, like I think you have to be a generous person, collaborate with a generous person, respect the person, and stay really open to like seeing what it can be. Like, you know, have an idea in mind of like something you want to investigate, but allow it to maybe shift.
Mhm.
Steve, what's been your experience previously?
Yeah, I've had previous, mostly in the form of writing groups, and I've almost all my life I've been in a writing group in a sense, even as I'm in a graduate school in North Carolina. I'm in a writing group, and I've been in writing groups of Southern writers and science fiction writers and all kinds of writers, and I learned something from all of them. And I think the good ones, as Jackie says, they're people who I respect their work, and they like people who I like their work and they like my work. And that's a great starting point, because then from there you can build kind of an honesty. And the worst writing groups is when there's somebody who just isn't there to learn anything, and you know, they want you to critique it, but more at say a level where you really don't have any input to give, and that's all they'll take. And so as Jackie said, that generosity is kind of a big deal. And I've been in some fantastic writing groups, and the feature that I think that was so compelling is that we all liked each other. We all liked each other's work, and we weren't afraid to tell somebody that, and I've been told this many times, your writing is crap. So, I mean, not my writing is crap, but this piece is crap. And you really messed up the ending and changed that. So that's one thing, is this willingness to be vulnerable and to be open and to be generous. I think that's probably the 3 things I would identify as making a great collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Jackie, I was really struck by your Philip Guston reference, because after he changed styles and New York hated him, he went to Woodstock and became friends with all these poets. And they were a generation at least younger than he was. And he found in that collaboration a rejuvenation. Do you think that that's part of the possibility, of the potential rather, of collaboration, is to rejuvenate the work that you're doing and give you some new vantage points?
I don't know if it's a rejuvenation. I've never really felt stifled in my work. I don't feel like I've felt like I needed a kickstart in the pants about it. But one thing I want to say about that, with the idea of poets and poets and visual artists, is that all my favorite artists hung out with poets. It is it is just something about that. I think there's something about wanting to really get at something where they're pushing each other, but they're not really in competition, right? They're not making the same thing at all, but they're just wanting to really understand life. And they're going about it in 2 different ways. And it is enriching both of their work. I mean, what that was happening in the late 40s, early 50s, it was happening with the Beat Generation. It was happening, you know, like I could name endless amounts that, you know, also musicians are thrown in there as well. Like what was happening with jazz. So fascinating. So I don't know if it's a rejuvenation, but it is a sense of like, you've found your tribe, right? You found your people that we're in this, and we are sacrificing quite a bit of other things to do this, in the sense of maybe you can make more money doing something else, or maybe people don't feel like it's adding any value to the world, or right, there's like a list of things, but that to find the people where that also say with you, keep going, right? Like there's value in you figuring this out and making these things.
I'm gonna cut you off though, because we have one more question to wrap up with, and our time is a little bit short, but I'm sorry to do that.
Okay.
Vanessa Cook, a choreographer from Switzerland, writes a question that I think will be a good one to end with today. She writes, I love the idea of in-between work. Is it the case that new bodies of work are repeatedly born out of the in-between gathering idea phase?
Yes.
Go ahead, Steve.
Yes, very much so. And I think those in-between spaces are really important. I think they're places to explore. And I think that's an important part of art is the ability to step back and learn, see what questions are nagging at you, what kinds of concepts are compelling and need to be poked a little bit more and explored. So it's in those in-between places that I think a lot of work gets done, and it's a lot of important work in that sense, creatively.
All right, my clock says that our time is up. I'm going to turn it back to Michael, and will give us a little bit of road mapping on what's to come, and thank you, I assume.
Absolutely. Steve, Jackie, thank you so much for being with us and for sharing your experiences and your work and your advice. This has been a really inspiring and invigorating hour. We are going to close by opening up the breakout rooms. And if you'd like to stay on, they'll stay open about 15 minutes. We'll be in groups of 3 to 4. So you can just chat, talk about some of the things that you've heard, or meet other artists from other disciplines who could potentially become collaborators or inspire your own future work. So we'll get ready. We'll open those up and we'll give you a 3-minute warning before they'll close, just so we don't cut you off mid-conversation. But Jackie, Steve, thank you so much for all of your thoughts and for your preparation ahead of this session. It's really been rewarding. All right, we'll open up breakout rooms. Thanks.